Hey, welcome to this Muzzle Flash tutorial. My name is Murray. I'm not going to do a whole intro, I'm exhausted. This project has taken quite a while, so let's just jump right in. This may not seem like long for you, but for me it's taken me a whole day to do all of this. So I've got to go through 12 hours of footage, and it's at the end of the day right now. It's 7 o'clock at night and I'm exhausted, but I'm going to keep going. So after I applied the 3D camera tracker to my main video footage, I realized that the track was imperfect because of how shaky and all over the place the shot was, which I expected. So I split it up into a few parts. There was the first part where the explosion happened, and then there's the second part where he's shooting the gun. And really the only reason why I tracked the second half of the video is because of the explosion at the end. And I felt like maybe if the bullet shells were on screen for long enough, you might be able to tell that they weren't tracked. So I'm just going to track it just to be safe. So after I tracked that first section and the second section, I selected a few or sometimes even just one tracker on the video footage here. I right clicked on it and I created a null and a camera. Now you can see that the null and the camera were created to be the same length as that video footage, as that layer in the timeline. So that's nice. Anything that is 3D and is overlapping those layers, it will be affected by that 3D camera. After I positioned the bullet shell where I wanted to, this is just a video of a bullet shell moving in a circle in slow motion. You can choose to speed it up if you want to. I got this from actionvfx.com or videocopilot.net, I don't remember which one. But I turned it into a 3D layer and you can see that it's clearly hovering in the air, and I don't want that. So I'm going to push it back in Z space, that way I can push it further back towards the actual layer that the background footage is at, because I want it to be tracked with the actual footage. And then I just keyframe the position and I go forward in time and I just move it out of frame. And then it's got these tabs which I can move so that I can add a bit of an arc to the path of the bullet shell. That way it's not so rigid and it looks like the shell is coming out of the gun and then falls down to the ground with a bit of force. Looks like the shell's coming out of the gun at an angle, and then it kind of loses its momentum and then starts going down towards the ground. And also don't forget to turn on motion blur, just to add some realistic blur to the motion of the bullet shell. That way it's not so sharp and obvious. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the effects and presets, and I'm just going to grab the curves and I'm just going to adjust them so that it's not so bright and vibrant, because I do want to match it a little bit with the surroundings, because I'm going to have to put a grade on later towards the whole project, and I don't want the shell to be I don't want the shell to stick out too much. So after I kind of play around with the curves and just kind of fix the look, I'm also going to add the tint, and I'm just going to tint it to kind of like a light blue kind of feel, just to kind of reflect some of the sky and some of the blue feel around the scene. And I can also turn down the amount of tint on that layer as well, just to kind of make it feel more realistic. So after that, I'm just going to repeat the process for the shells, and then by the end of that I'm just going to mask around the gun after I duplicate the background layer, and then I'm going to just keyframe the mask path. I'm also going to feather it to about 2 or 3, it just depends on what you have in your situation. But it's not going to be too big of a deal because everything's going to be moving very fast, so not many people are going to notice. But once I keyframe the position of the mask, I can actually go to the tracker tab on the right and just click track forward with my mask selected. And sometimes the mask will be a little accurate and you can keep moving, or you might have to adjust it a little. But by clicking the track forward, it'll reduce your work significantly. It'll help save some of your time, and it also reduces the need for adjusting so much of your mask. You don't have to do as much work. And then after that rotoscoping is finished, I make sure that that masked layer is on top of the shells. That way the shells are behind, because the shells came out of the other side of the gun. So very important detail there. Next we have the muzzle flashes. I grabbed these from actionvfx.com, or you can also get them at Action Essentials, which is Video Copilot's pack. Now one thing I need to take note of is the color and the brightness of the flash. Right now it's pretty obvious and bright. I need to make sure it's not so bright, because in daylight, especially outside, it's not going to be very easy to see muzzle flashes. So I reduce it almost to 0% for that flash, and then I take that opacity back up to 100% a frame further down the timeline, because I want to still be able to see the smoke. And I just make sure that I position it and adjust it to where it needs to be at the end of the barrel, but I also make sure that the actual smoke and flare are about the same size as the gun. Usually people, when they add muzzle flashes to their guns, they don't add those muzzle flashes as big as they should be. They don't make it big enough. Usually with a real gun's muzzle flash, if you do happen to see it, it's going to be approximately the same size of the gun that's shooting it. So I want to keep the same feel, and keep in mind that you don't necessarily need to have a muzzle flash at every single shot. There's a lot of inconsistencies, and due to the frames that you might be shooting at, it might miss the muzzle flash, but you'll still catch the smoke. So you can still have a muzzle flash without the actual flash. Just make sure you add the smoke, because that's a necessity. And there was actually one case where I didn't add a muzzle flash, I just added the smoke and just a small spark. That's also cool and also very useful to kind of sell the randomness of muzzle flashes and to kind of not make it so uniform and obvious. Once I've finished with the muzzle flashes, I'm just going to create a new solid with Ctrl+Y, or I can just go to layer and I can go to new solid. I'm going to make it sort of a light gray color, and I'm just going to scale it down because I kind of want to reveal the slide when the shell of the bullet comes out. So what would happen is this solid would reveal itself almost like the slide is coming back and revealing the inside of the gun. That way the shell can actually eject. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my background layer, and I'm going to go to the camera tracker here, and I'm going to track motion. I'm also going to track the rotation because the gun is rotating, so I'm going to need to use that data as well. So once I place the points, I'm going to just track it forward and adjust it wherever I need to. Alright, then I have all that tracking data, and I'm just going to create a new null object just so I can apply the tracking data to it, and then I can just go to apply and I can apply it to that null object. And I'm going to click yes for X and Y, and now I have that null following the gun just like I wanted it to. Next, I can just parent that solid or the layer to the null object. That way it does exactly what I want it to do. I'm going to move the anchor point to the right side of that solid, and I'm also going to uncheck the uniform scale property, kind of like the chain link on the side here. That way I can only scale the x-axis or the y-axis individually. Now that way when I adjust the scale, it'll look as if the slide is opening and closing. So what I do is I set a keyframe for the scale, go down in time, probably about 3 seconds or so, maybe 2, and then I adjust the scale to where I see the slide fully open. I can't go too far because otherwise that solid will go too far out and it'll just look strange. So I make sure it's to the length of the actual slide on the gun, and then I hold it there for about 1 or 2 frames, and then I take it back down to 0. That way that slide is back in position, ready for the next shot. And I simply repeat this process for the other muzzle flashes as well. I gotta make sure I time it right with the other muzzle flashes. That way right after the muzzle flash, 1 frame later, that slide will open and then close, ready for the next shot. And then it's just a matter of importing my shell layer. You can get these from actionvfx.com. I'll leave a link in the description. I'm going to drag it into Z space because I've made it a 3D layer. That way it tracks to the scene, because I'm not sure if this is going to be on screen long enough for people to see if it's actually tracked in the scene or not. So I'm just going to be safe and make it 3D anyways. Once I position it to where I want it to come out the slide, I'm going to keyframe the position, and I'm going to go down a few frames down the timeline, drag it out of frame. And with these little tabs, I can kind of add a little bit of arc to the path of the shell. That way it comes out of the gun at an angle towards upwards a little bit. And then gravity kind of takes effect and takes it down out of frame. And again, I repeat the process for the rest of the shots with that shell. I make sure I duplicate it, reposition it, because I know I'm going to have to reposition the guns in a different spot than it was before, and I lengthen or shorten the distance between the keyframes of the position. That way it kind of adds a little bit of variety to the motion and rotation and so on. And then one other little detail you must have is you create a new solid, make it like a bright yellow or an orange type of feel, click OK. Then I'm just going to go to the blend layer, I'm going to go to the blend mode, and I'm going to do add. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide it just for the sake, or actually I'm going to take the opacity down to I'd say around about there. And what I'm going to do is with my mask tool or my pen tool, drag a shape around Jason's arm, and then I'm just going to feather it quite a lot, and I'm going to make sure it appears right where the muzzle flash appears, and it's going to last for about 2 or 3 frames. So once it comes in, I keyframe it, I go down about 2 or 3 frames and then fade it out to 0%. That way once the muzzle flash comes in, you see a little flash on the arm. Make sure it's not too long because that can kind of make it linger and it looks a little unrealistic like that. So about 2 or 3 frames is decent. And feel free to add this to other parts of the gun and maybe the face. Just kind of areas where you feel like the light will hit after the muzzle flash. Make sure it's not in a strange place where the gun is clearly covering the part of the body, so there would be no light there. So don't put it in areas where it just wouldn't make sense. And you can also add it to the surroundings, like this tree. I'm going to draw a shape around this, and I'm also going to feather all of these masks, and it just depends on what looks good. One other nice little trick you can do to kind of accentuate some of the glow from the muzzle flash is draw a shape around the actual flash itself and just adjust the position of the mask a bit if you want to, kind of add an oval shape and just add a feather. That way it just kind of accentuates the flash a little bit, adds a little bit more realism. And then I just repeat the process for the rest of the shots. And then there we have it, our final result. So that's pretty much it. If you guys enjoyed, consider subscribing. If you're new, consider sticking around. A lot of visual effects, editing, filmmaking, some more filmmaking tutorials coming in the very near future. Excited for that because I haven't done any of those recently. So yeah, stick around for that. If you guys want to support some of my work, down in the description there's quite a lot of ways to do so. One of them is on my shop. There's some free presets for you guys. Also some premium downloads. Like 90% of it's free, which is nice. But yeah, I appreciate the support you guys might want to give. But yeah, until next time, remember, keep smiling, keep shooting.